All right, welcome back. Happy engineer. And today, Leon, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you and dig into your life, your story, and your expertise. Thanks for making time, man.
Hey, Zach, great to be with you.
So, we had a really fun little chat before I hit record today, and I asked about something on your LinkedIn profile that I think is super interesting. I want to explore it again. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So here's a CTO doing some incredible technology, and we're going to talk about AI and about careers and dig into some really important and time sensitive topics today. But before we get there, I've got to get into like, when did you start Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Where does that fit into your life, man?
Yeah, Zach, so I have to take you back all the way to like junior high and high school.
Okay.
No surprise. I was a scrawny, nerdy kid. Like I started coding when I was like 9 or 10 years old, Apple II. So I was picked on all the time. There's this classic story that my friends still remind me of. This one bully kept me in a headlock for the whole lunch period one day, right? And it was like a challenge for him and his buddies to see if he could hold me in a headlock for the whole lunch period. I was picked on constantly. Anyway, so if you fast
Oh,
forward
man.
in grade 9 or 10, I joined the wrestling team, and I didn't want to join the wrestling team. I asked the coach if he would help me teach me how to defend myself so I could stand
Okay.
up for myself. And he said, "You know what, Leon? I will show you, but you have to join the team and stick it out till the end of the year." So I did. And I wasn't great at it at the beginning, but I got better and better over time and ended up competing more seriously. And I really fell in love with it. But wrestling is kind of a thing that ends in college and high school, right? Like not a lot of professional capability afterwards. So when I was living in Los Angeles, I discovered this grappling art right around the time when UFC came out called Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yes.
And honestly, by then I was in my early 30s. I was kind of out of shape, I hated running, didn't really have any other exercise that I wanted to do. And it saved, from a physical perspective, it saved my life. I really benefit so much from being able to train. And I'm almost 50 now, and I still train. The kids are still much younger, but now, from a skills perspective, the playing field's a bit more level.
Wow. So, I mean, we could talk about jujitsu all day. There's so many questions I have, but I'm actually curious, having gone into that training and the comment you just made, it saved my life. How does jujitsu and engineering relate for you? Where have you found overlap, or how does it inform the way you approach your career? I mean, obviously extremely successful in your career. We'll talk more about that, but where's the parallels for you?
Jiu-jitsu teaches you, it's very much like a chess game, or I would say it's more complex than chess. It's more like Go because the patterns are much more infinite that you can kind of follow. And you have physical attributes that you have to kind of understand about your opponent and understand about yourself. Are you flexible? Are you strong? What skill set do you have?
Okay.
So I actually wrote a really interesting article about this years ago about like what cybersecurity and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu have in common. Like when you're facing a cyber adversary, how do you think of that in terms of a physical altercation? But anyway, so the sport has taught me to be patient and to be analytical far more than one or two moves in advance, to
Yeah.
really understand surrounding. And patience is such a big part of it, Zach, because often when you try to rush something, it doesn't work out because the circumstances around you aren't ready. But if you learn to time and anticipate the reactions of the environment and of your opponent in this case, you really get a much better result. So it's taught me to think critically in a lot of aspects that I now use every single day.
Yes. Yes. So is it for you something that connection happens naturally? So you're in a board meeting or you're working on a piece of technology and you just subconsciously find yourself applying a principle like timing and patience or looking at my adversary in a certain way. It just happens.
It just
Or
happens.
okay, yeah, see, I think that's I've had the same experience with things that I've done. For me, people who listen to the show know I have a ballroom dancing background, and all of the things that I've done in dance create these subconscious experiences that show up in areas outside of dance, including business and engineering and other things. And that's what I love about this kind of multidisciplinary mental model way of living. And just encourage everybody get a hobby and go dig in. Especially, we use our minds for a living. When you do something with your body for recreation. I think that's a really powerful way to balance your
You,
life. But yeah,
Zach, it's really interesting you say that because usually you would think of an engineering team to be more sedate and more kind of focused on, the book smart, so to speak. In the current team that I have on the field, I'm really amazed by them. Almost every single one of them is an athlete.
yeah,
Triathlon. One of them was talking to me about a biking tour they did in Spain this week. I love the fact that the engineering discipline is moving towards also having a physical counterpart outside of work because you're going to have a bad back, you're going to have bad posture. All of these things are going to affect
yeah,
you. And if you want a long and thriving career, you need to take care of your body.
I agree. I agree. So, Leon, I want to unpack something that's pressing in this time of history with you. At the point we're recording this, it's early 2023. Most of the, at least engineering world, is spending their nights and weekends playing on Chat GPT right now. We just chatted about that before the call. And everybody's asking new questions about what is AI going to do in our industries for our jobs. And you have a really powerful perspective and expertise in this, and we want to get there. But rather than start at the end, I want to begin with where did you become that expert and how you now are in the space that you're in. So back us up maybe all the way if you're willing and tell us about from childhood to getting into this world. What are those key milestones and moments that pulled you into technology and engineering and how we got to today? So you can go back as far as you want, Leon.
So I come from a family of engineers, so it's kind of unfair. Eastern European background. So I was born in a city called Odessa, and my mom was an electrical engineer. My dad was hands-on. I wouldn't call him a mechanical engineer, although he was basically the guy in the shop putting the machines together from all
Okay.
the drawings. And then my brother became a mechanical engineer, and they have a very successful family like robotics business in food processing. And my
Amazing.
mom, so I was doing sales for them in college, and I'll just kind of skip forward a little bit. I had this offer to go and work in an internship at IBM here in Toronto. And my mom said, you know what? This family business is super hard on work-life balance. Like, basically family has no life outside of work. She wanted more for me and for my family. And she said, go do the IBM gig because you're going to at least have a chance to discover what that work-life balance. I don't want you to be an entrepreneur. It was essentially her message
Interesting.
because it's too hard. It's called the immigrant's dilemma. I don't know if you've ever heard the term before, but like immigrants come to the country, they want to do well so that their kids can become doctors and lawyers and engineers so that they don't have to work as hard as previous generations. Anyway, so I went to go work for IBM, and I got very fortunate that I didn't get stuck in a boring project. I started working on this e-commerce thing back in 1996, and it was just a ragtag team of like 4 or 5 devs that put together a product that wasn't even a product really, that became the launch pad for IBM's e-commerce platform. Essentially, it's called WebSphere Commerce Suite, and it
Okay.
launched like LL Bean was our first customer, and then Sony Style and a whole bunch of others, right? So all of a sudden, this little team of 6 got all this budget and notoriety, and we kind of quickly outgrew our founding team, and it became a team of hundreds and hundreds. I had this interesting inspiration, and I'm like, we ship this product and it takes us a year to ship it in shrink wrap, right? It was still actually shipped on CDs back then. I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
this is just the wrong way to
Yep.
deliver software. Why doesn't someone come to an online experience, sign up, get provisioned? Basically, it was software as a service before Salesforce existed, before all these things
Wow.
existed.
Yes.
And that was kind of when my foray into entrepreneur. So that was my first and almost last big company job. And then I've been an entrepreneur ever since, right? And have had great successes and failures and spectacular failures in starting companies. And you need to have both in order to be ultimate. It's like Elon Musk always says, it's the rate of failure, right? It's not about optimizing for individual successes, but how quickly can you get to failure on
Mm-hmm.
those
Mm-hmm.
attempts that don't work out? And that's what kind of brought me all the way through startup life. And I
So
would
real
say,
quick, let me back you up because
yeah,
mom gave you this fair warning. Don't go down the path of burnout and entrepreneurial life and the things that we've experienced. Go experience some balance, be a W-2 employee. you did that, had great success there, the team scaled, and then you leaped out into entrepreneurship anyway. I'm curious, Leon, if you were going to go back and give yourself advice the way mom did, would you give the same advice, or how do you feel about that decision now?
Yeah, she wasn't right. Like she wanted to protect me, but I can't imagine. And this is not for everyone. I'll tell you, entrepreneurship is super
Yeah,
hard. Startup life is super hard. Most people fail, but I can't imagine a life where I'm a cog in the machine of a much bigger organization. It just doesn't fit my personality that well. But other folks are perfectly content in that world and they find other things other than entrepreneurship for that feeling of success. And that's cool. But yeah, my mom wasn't right about that one. And
interesting.
I think she understands that now that it wouldn't have fit my personality type.
For the people who it's for, man, it's great. And it is so rewarding. And for the people who it's not for, being an entrepreneur will be the worst experience of your life. And it really is important to answer that question clearly for yourself. And at least, Leon, my perspective in the last 5 years, 10 years, it seems like it's becoming really fashionable to want to start your own business for a lot of good reasons. But a lot of people I see doing it are not actually asking the question, am I an entrepreneur? They just want the money or the notoriety or the freedom and this idea that I can work on whatever I want, which sounds great on paper, but it's really hard. Would you share your story about some of the challenges you faced with regard to balance and energy in your life for anybody who might be asking, like, oh, was it all paychecks and roses for Leon after he left IBM?
Yeah, it wasn't, certainly not. There are so many adversarial stories. It's probably easier to tell the happy ones, but let me try to kind of give you some color. Firstly, for folks who thinks they can do whatever they want, once you raise $1 of money from the outside world, you are no longer in control of your destiny. Especially as you start going from seed round to Series A to Series B, your control of the company diminishes significantly, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of equate it to being on a treadmill in some ways. Once you start that growth path, you're on that treadmill and you're running. And sometimes it feels like it's very difficult to get off, like if ever, right? Like you're going to basically either run to the end or you're going to fly off in a dismal
Mm-hmm.
failure. So I would say there's an illusion of control that doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
And I will tell you, there have been many times where we have been on the end of the rope and hey, we're 2 weeks away from not making payroll. Not recently, thank goodness, but you have 100 people on the hook that their livelihoods depend on you, and you're 2 weeks away from not being able to pay those people. Never mind not taking a salary for a couple months because that's just what you have to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
don't do it for the money, that's for sure, because there's a 9 in 10 chance that it's not going to work out financially, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, even
Mm-hmm.
now, like even starting this latest business cast, it's debatable, even if this is a great success, and I maybe see that financial success in a few years, it's debatable whether this would be more financially lucrative than staying at a large company like a
Right.
Google or
Right.
not Microsoft, right?
Yeah. I appreciate your candor on that. And personally, being on that treadmill, what are the risks that you've experienced the consequences of if you're not intentional on that treadmill? If you get stuck, what happens?
I would say, and probably this happens to a lot of folks, what I'll call in that kind of invincible quadrant, right? Where you can be maybe out of your late 20s, you have enough experience to really kind of feel like you can make an impact on the industry. You're maybe in your early 30s and you feel like you still have the stamina of a teen. So what do? You burn the candle on both sides. My only restrictive factor in my mind back then was time. Like I just need more time to do things and
Mm-hmm.
I will ultimately be able to outpace others around me. So you start sleeping less. When you're sleeping less, you're not paying as much attention to your exercise and your diet regime, and your body starts to kind of break down. This is why I'm saying exercise is so important to keep your
Yeah.
body in shape.
Yeah.
And like, I think people break in one of two ways, Zach. So people either break emotionally, and that's what you traditionally see as a burnout. Somebody who's just been disengaged or just takes a leave of absence because they can't emotionally get back into their work. Some people break physically. So that's me. I'm on that kind of, I won't disengage mentally, but I'll break physically. And in my case, I had a heart attack when I think I was I think I was 42 when that happened, right? So about 8 years ago, right?
Wow.
When and then when I saw the doctor, and after they put the stent in, it was one artery that was 98% closed, and it was from lack of sleep. Like I think I had slept 3 hours a night on average that week, right? When the doctor said to me, he goes, "Look, I see you're not overweight. You don't smoke. You don't drink. I've never seen this before where someone came in with a completely closed artery at your age without any of. If you had told me this was a case study before, I wouldn't have believed it. It just goes to the how important is your stress level and your ability
Yeah.
to maintain sleep and diet and exercise relative to your ability to continue the work that you want to do.
Yeah. What was the biggest change you had to make to recover from that heart attack and that season of life?
On the emotional side, it was just like figuring out what's important and how do you stick around for your kids? Because I have three of them, right? All the way from 25 to 9 right now. And then there is how do you maintain a pace that you want to maintain without a reoccurrence, right? So it started with diet, it started with putting exercise higher in the priority list.
Yeah.
And then I started doing a few things like tracking my sleep. So I know every night I get 7.5 hours of sleep. And I started intermittent fasting. And that's after trying all vegetarian diet. That's after trying like statins, to get my cholesterol level down. And then I finally hit on this combination that works for me, which is intermittent fasting. So I don't eat for 16 hours a day. And that shot my cholesterol almost to like, you know, beyond perfect levels, but almost to like when you were 18 or 19, that's what your kind of cholesterol readings would be.
Wow. Well, glad you're doing well. And what I love about that story, and I'm the same way, and my clients who sign up for our coaching programs, one of the things I encourage them in is like, we love engineering. Let's treat these things, like an experiment and something you want to continuously improve and learn on, just like we do at work. And so what's working for you may not work for someone else, but rather than throw our hands up or make excuses about it, let's keep trying new things, keep testing, keep collecting that evidence and data to learn. But so important. So Leon, the coach in me wants to talk about this all day, but the engineer in me wants to get onto the juicy bits about your zone of genius. So would you just describe from a technology perspective your sweet spot, your zone of genius and expertise with what you do now and through the decades of work you've done, and kind of give us the box that you play in?
Sure. So look, let me just take you back just a couple of years. So I've been doing cybersecurity as my primary kind of point of focus for many, many years, right? Well, let's call it 15 plus years or so. In the last startup that we did, it was a company called ZenEdge. We decided to deploy the whole product into the cloud. And we said, look, as customers come on board, we'll just order more infrastructure. It was in AWS at the time, and our costs will keep up with our revenue. And what started happening was the finance team would send my CEO the invoice every month.
Yeah.
And it would blow out of control because we were growing pretty quickly. And the truth is, I didn't know what to tell him. I didn't have an answer for why the bill was growing exponentially.
For
Right?
cloud computing and
For
services.
cloud computing specifically. And we went through all of these layers of let's buy reserved instances, all these kind of discounts and saving schemes that we would try to do that the cloud was recommending, that AWS was recommending. And while the product it was a good product. I think customers really loved it. Analysts loved it. We ended up being acquired by Oracle, and it was integrated nicely into the Oracle Cloud Suite. We never really solved the cloud cost problem because we just moved them into Oracle data centers. The cost of goods sold line item became zero, but did we ever really solve the upside down equation of costs? And then during the beginning of COVID, right, we got this clear message saying, we as a world are short on chips. Everyone needs to conserve their computers. The supply chain is going to be disrupted for a while. So I noticed these efficiency programs with customers and within Oracle themselves, like, hey guys, we got to cut down the amount of compute. And it was all a manual effort. For customers, for us, for everyone, it was a manual effort. And I'm like, I can't be the only person in the world. We as a team can't be the only team who hasn't solved this problem, that we're manually chasing these efficiencies and trying to bring our bills down. I don't want a report that tells me what to do. I want something to do it for me, right? So we made a bunch of these assumptions around the industry. And then I actually switched my focus from cybersecurity to infrastructure when we started Cast. And our goal is to create an autonomous computing environment. And we have a lot of different like sub goals under there. But the first one, which is the most prevalent for today, is bring that cloud bill down automatically. So you onboard with us
Yes.
and we just shed away the excess waste in your environment to get you to a solid state. And then you can build from there. And then, by the way, a lot of those algorithms that we run, some of them are heuristics, some of them are machine learning driven. I think the combination of smart heuristics and machine learning, that's kind of the bubble that I call artificial intelligence, because it creates
Yes.
the perception from the outside world that there's a human-like entity controlling these systems.
I love that. And put real quick in time frame, when was that switch for you in launching Cast?
It was in 2020.
In 2020. So
Yeah.
literally right in the middle of we're still in lockdown. This idea is coming to light, and we launch Cast. And where is the organization at today in terms of its maturity?
So myself and our founding team, so Yuri Laurent, we seeded the company with our own money, which was a luxury that you could have later in your career, right? You
Yep.
can't
Yep.
write a check at the beginning of your career to give us a little bit more control. So, and then we had a group of investors that seeded the company. We've already gone through Series A with a VC, and we are going through a Series B process right now, which is a growth phase. Without giving you specific numbers, we've hit product market fit. So we've got well
Yeah.
over 50 customers now. We grew at a 10x rate last year. So 2022 was a 10x year.
Congrats.
And we're going to
Congrats.
try for some similar multiple in 2023, although it gets harder as you
Always.
find, right?
Yeah, no doubt. All right. So, I mean, congratulations. And that's amazing. And I do encourage every engineering leader to go check out what's going on with Cast. There's some really, really brilliant technology behind what you're doing. And it makes sense that every organization that wants to build on these cloud platforms needs to pay attention to this. But it opens the door then with where AI, machine learning, all of these trends that are so hotly discussed right now, where is it going? What does it mean? And so maybe to start with, can you put a lens on what you see is happening in that discussion? What is the narrative today, Leon, that people are hearing? Let's just sort of start with a baseline. What are the different perspectives? What's the conversation?
I think here's what changed in the last, well, let's call it year and a half, Zach, is that people used to think, well, computers could do relatively mundane jobs pretty well, but they can't do creative work, right? So you can't draw a picture, you can't write a symphony, you can't write a piece of code because coding is considered to be creative. You can't design a machine. Those things are the realm of humans. If you want to get a computer to do a structured process like a business process automation, sure, they can do that, no problem. What's changed, and I would say this is a kind of a multi-year trend, is these neural networks have been repurposed
Yes.
to simulate creativity. And it's in some ways, it's more than simulation. So it started with the team that Google bought. I would say I'd have to go back to exactly, but have you ever seen this thing on Netflix? It's called AlphaGo. It's where the computer plays the world's best Go player.
Yes.
And I think it was in South Korea. And the analysts that were watching, and this was a game watched by 200 million people, and the analysts watching this game believe the computer makes this massive mistake. They're like, game over, this computer's just fallen apart. And maybe 20 moves later, they realize the genius and the creativity of the move. And everyone is just blown away that this was an original creative strategy that the computer developed to play
Yes.
against this player. That's been a recent evolution. So you see now with DALL-E is the image generator that can create aesthetic artwork that we find as humans pleasing, that is completely unique and original art. The same thing for ChatGPT, based on the same tech for narrative and prose. And now we see these models that have been trained to write code. So you can, for $10 a month, install a plugin into your IDE, write a comment, and I'll give you a mechanical engineering example in a second. Write a comment about what you want the code to do, and it'll spit out the code, and you just make a few edits, and you're good to go. So you want to hear about this example, right? So
yeah, please.
So my son's working on he's an environmental engineer. So it's all engineering in the family, right? And he is working on a system for a laboratory to help understand plant drought stress. And so that requires some automation of watering and temperature controls, all of the environmental controls you'd be used
Yes.
to
Classic.
collecting data from, right? And so he's got this little Arduino and he's got to connect to it over a serial port, but he's not a programmer, right? So several months before we sit down and I'm showing him how to write this all in Python and we're looking it up in the documentation and it takes us weeks, right? So he tries the same experiment with AI generated code and he types in a comment that says, give me a piece of code that connects to an Arduino device over a serial cable, is able to accept commands from the device, and then execute submodules for every different command. And he gets half a page of code that is pretty much what we wrote together.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
and then we were reflecting on it, and he goes, Dad, this is great for me because I'm never going to be a coder. I'm not going to go down that career path like you did, but I need to have these skill sets. So for me to casually be able to generate a set of code that helps me with machine control is unbelievable. And I don't have to spend the 10,000 hours there. I can spend it elsewhere.
Yeah. Or rely on another colleague to come over and you put that in the queue and you're waiting for someone else to get it done. Which
Exactly.
was, I'm thinking back to my engineering days, Leon. That's exactly what would have happened in that situation. You know, as soon as I get to that threshold of my ability to write code, especially as a test engineer, when I was in the lab and working with these PLC controllers and all this stuff that I didn't have a clue. It's like, where's MATLAB? You know, I wanted to go back to Purdue and write something in MATLAB. But yeah, it's just you got to get help. You know, reach out to somebody who's already the expert. And a lot of times they're busy. They're not just sitting there waiting for your problem. So that's huge.
Yeah, and Zach, you were using these Allen Bradley devices, these PLC devices.
Yeah.
So that ladder logic is super hard for humans to understand. I still struggle with that kind of machine level code. So you're absolutely right. It's much
Mm.
better to have someone help out in those contexts, and the machine is just as good as a person in this case.
Interestingly enough, you mentioned all these creative examples, and I have a client right now who's applying AI into music, writing music, really impressive music, and he's being sought after by different companies that want to leverage this technology to create music on demand through AI. It's just amazing. So, okay, this major swing in belief from creative work is the domain of humans and executing with extreme precision and speed things that we've created for computers to do has now been disrupted. We're all looking at it, playing with it, asking new questions. It has absolutely stirred up fear in many people. What does this mean for this industry, these jobs, those jobs? You know, what is going to happen here? So walk us down the path a little bit, Leon. What do you see unfolding in the near term? Maybe then we could talk longer term, but like let's start in the next, you'll call it 1 to 4 years, like in a near term time frame. Where is this going?
In the very short term, there's still a lot of unclarity around the commercial models that surround these AI innovations, right? And so I'll give you a couple of examples. These models are developed with open source data streams, right? So, like in ChatGPT's case, they're scraping the web to pull down articles.
Yeah,
So, when you can give a user an answer without referencing the original source material, there's going to be a legal challenge there.
yeah,
And this is what OpenAI, who's the company behind ChatGPT, and I'm sure they're thinking about this, right? They have to figure out how they're going to create attribution for the input documents, right? So Google does this because you click on a link and there's a revenue and a monetizable way of getting back to the source document.
sure. Yep.
But with ChatGPT, you get an answer that is a derivative work. So what's the legal ramification? So first of all, to get a viable commercial model that makes money, they have to figure out this legal hurdle. And I predict it's going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's going to be adjudicated at the highest levels because it has a direct impact on our society.
Yeah.
But let's assume we get past that hurdle. I think certain jobs are going to be harder for humans to do than machines. And I'll give you a couple of extreme examples. The legal field is extremely complex with huge amount of codependencies. I think that a big portion of the work that humans do to prepare for legal arguments
Mm-hmm.
will be automated by machines. Same is true in gap accounting. Like I don't see a future 100 years from now, let's call it, where there's a
Yeah.
role called an accountant, unfortunately. But by the same token, 100 years ago, let's call it 70 years ago, we had an elevator operator that was a
Right.
real job. Like,
Right.
we don't have elevator operators anymore. The equestrian population of the United States was, through the roof. Everyone had horses. We don't, so society evolves. It's not a negative thing. You see, I think trying to have a resistance strategy where you say, no, no, we need to keep these jobs. We can't
Yeah.
have automation because we need to get, no, we need to educate people. As a society, it's our job to make sure there's access to education so that people can elevate their creativity and their skill
Yeah.
sets and do more interesting things versus doing the low level mundane. And Zach, I face that all of the time with engineers, right? With DevOps engineers, because my platform is designed to take away some of the mundane work. And there's this natural fear of, no, 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 don't touch these settings. These are settings that I've hand tuned over 5 years and only I know how to get them right. Like, well, it's a bit of a
Yes.
protectionist attitude that is ultimately going to have to fall away.
I agree with that. And well, I'm gonna just leave there. I totally agree with that. And so maybe for our time today, Leon, because we're not going to, solve the challenge of how to prepare and educate everyone on the planet. Let's focus on engineering and maybe specifically in the world of software and full stack architecture and the roles that are closer aligned to the work that you do. What would an engineering leader at whatever stage of their career want to be thinking about in how to prepare themselves to create value in a world 5, 10, 20 years from now?
The really important thing to understand is in the fields that we're talking about, we have a general shortage of human capability and skill set. We're millions of engineers short globally, right? There's no shortage of work. We should be
Wait,
looking
let's
at
let's say that again. This is a real. Within weeks of this interview, there's been tens of thousands of engineers laid off in the world. It's a lot of people may not necessarily like or agree with that statement. So unpack that for a little bit. What makes you say that we're millions of engineers short, at least over some time horizon?
so just in cybersecurity, and this is like a well understood stat, we're like something like 6 million cybersecurity analysts short, right? Kind of an adjunct to
Yeah.
the engineering field. So from a technical work perspective, you have to separate the fact that Google, Amazon, and all of these folks overhired in anticipation of ever expanding growth.
Yes. Yes.
What they've really been doing effectively is they've been taking players off the board. So when you pay an engineer so much money that it is not worth it for them to do a startup like thing or take higher risk,
Yes. Yes.
I'll get paid this, ungodly amount of money and do work way under what my potential is versus going out there and hunting for the next
Mm.
great idea.
Yep. Yep.
This is a mechanism for very large kind of what I'll call oligopolies to take players off the board, right? They're realizing, hey, money is no longer free. We
Yeah.
can no longer afford to take all these players off the board. We're going to have to compete and let them go into the world and find their true calling. And it may be that these 10,000 people are the next geniuses, or some combination of people that will exit those businesses are the next big entrepreneurs. It doesn't matter. The market has to readjust. So
Yes. Yes.
we're going to have a temporary blip of unemployment. Will people get paid as much? Probably not, but that's okay. The salaries are indicative of what overemployment looked like,
Yeah.
right? There weren't enough people.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I really agree with that sentiment. I think it's encouraging. I hope that every engineer I get to talk to will receive that message in a positive way. And it's no insensitivity to the challenge of being let go. It's a huge challenge. It's very disruptive to family life and everything. And my heart goes out to people who are in that situation. But there is, and I agree with you, so much opportunity. So that said, huge opportunity in this space. Where would someone aim their growth, their education, their readiness for this
Yeah.
new future?
A lot of it depends on where your passion lies. Like, so for example, folks that are really, and I'm speaking about software specifically because it's,
Yeah, perfect.
and there's a couple of areas. For folks that are specifically geared towards data, we're going to produce more data by orders of magnitude every year. The amount of storage we need to create is astronomical. So if you can generate a skill set around organizing and analyzing and gleaning insight out of data. That could be in machine learning, that could be in traditional statistical analysis. That is a massive opportunity that's not going anywhere, right? Like,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it requires some creativity that machines haven't yet proven capable of. But also in the realm of physical, like when software meets the physical world, there's also a massive demand for people with a dual skill set, people who understand the mechanical side of the world, but understand the software side of the world. And you can call it cybernetics or you can call it robotics,
Sure.
but these programs are burgeoning and they are exploding. So almost any kind of future mechanical engineering role will require some intense knowledge of the software side of the business.
Absolutely. I can say, and this is humbling, it's hurtful to myself to say this, but the truth is, Leon, I would not be in a position today to go compete for the type of job I would want if I were going to go back into mechanical engineering right now because of how disconnected I am from that world. And, by my own choice to take a different path here, but I 100% agree it's going to become essential.
By the way, and also hurts me, my guys won't let me touch production code. Right? Like it's
Yeah.
well, my skill set has evolved to be slightly different. I'm building an organization that can
Yeah.
execute on a vision versus I'll do it for fun, but they'll kind of laugh at me, and snicker and like, he still uses Python. That kind, you know what I mean? So
He still uses Python.
it's funny. I wrote this little low code. Low code is like something you can drag and drop things around and build a
Yeah.
UI pretty quickly. I wrote this thing for a customer because it was just we needed to get done. And the guys are like, "Well, you're cheating. Like you didn't actually write a lot of code." But I'm like, "Yes,
Hey,
that's true."
yeah,
But
but
it got
we
the
we
job
got
done.
the invoice paid. That's the the main thing. So Leon, then tell me for you, and I mean I know we're just projecting and guessing, but you have such a unique perspective in this area of your own genius. So where is the place that you see the limits of AI, what we can see, which is, sort of the uniquely human element of work. Where's the boundary in your perspective?
I think it's emotional intelligence, and we don't have enough computers on the planet to generate a single brain, let alone many, many brains, right? So we still don't understand how emotions work. It's all a chemical process. And you
Yeah.
need emotional intelligence to effectively come up with creative ideas that are unique. Not someone saying, do something in the realm of X, but actually, synthesize an idea from nothing. And you need
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence to get along with other people and orchestrate a plan that's bigger than yourself, that's bigger
Yeah.
than a single individual.
Yeah, I love that. Within the idea of creativity as a unique differentiating human element of work, do you think that holds true in the future, or does creativity take on a new definition in some way?
I think it takes on a meta definition where, like, for example, if you are in advertising, let's say, right? And are you going to necessarily work with an individual artist to come up with that? Or are you going to rapidly iterate with something like Dali that helps you come up with iterating versions of your vision where you describe them, but don't necessarily have to draw them yourself? So
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I have a similar bold prediction for 2023, Leon, that the vast majority of bloggers and content creators in like on LinkedIn, for example, who built their audience by just writing thoughts about a subject and their unique perspective, many of those people will be driven out of any reason to read their stuff because you can ask ChatGPT to write that blog and it can do it in 30 seconds and anyone on the planet can put out a decent piece of content. It's fascinating. And so the uniqueness of the person who's willing not just to regurgitate things they've heard, but actually as a thought leader, the true willingness to dig in and create something that hasn't been thought of before, I think it's going to separate the true thought leaders from people who are just, filling the internet with content, because what's the point? Why would I go read that anymore?
I think there'll be a class of people who specialize in interacting with these type of
Yes.
prompts that are
Yes.
really good at it. Like, so the difference in content will be, I know the questions to ask. This
Yes.
is my competitor doesn't.
Really good point.
Yeah.
Leon, I really appreciate this. And I do I'm energized by the positivity of where this leads. And yes, there's going to be destruction of certain areas of industry, but the creation of entirely new types of work, to your point about the elevator operator, we're entering a really exciting time for every engineer to consider where I fit in that picture. And I wish we had 2 more hours because we could just keep going all day on this, but I want to wrap it up and be respectful of your time. So, Leon, where can people find out more about what you're doing with Cast, connect with you, and understand the amazing work that you're doing?
Zach, just before we go, I did want to point out one kind of interesting nuance. I think we're going to have a educational crisis because of ChatGPT. I think people are going to be plagiarizing through that type of, like, ask any student, hey, do I want to write a paper or do I just want to, like, if they're
Ask.
kids are
Ooh.
going to get really good at this, and
Yeah.
it's going to get really hard to catch them. That is going to be a societal bubble we have to get through before we
Mm,
can figure out how to get students to learn to write without the aids. Most people coming out of university don't know how to write well. Like, their narrative skills have been, and especially if you get into corporations with PowerPoint presentations, everyone's just bulleting everything out. The art of writing is being lost in our society. And I'm worried that this type of technology actually leads to the acceleration of that loss.
absolutely. That's a probably a whole nother podcast we could come back and record a round two, Leon, on what this means for educating, period. You know, engineering being the focus of my passion, but yeah, wow.
Back to your question, you can get me on LinkedIn. Just look me up, Leon Kuperman, or you can just go to cast.ai. We have this, so our product is free for anyone who wants to install it. A separate conversation as to why. But you can install it and run it and get all kinds of recommendations for $0. And we also have a Slack community chat channel where you can go and talk to community members, and then all of my staff are on there helping customers all the time. So those are the best ways to reach us.
Brilliant. We'll put those in the show notes. I encourage every happy engineer out there to go check out what Leon and his team are doing. Leon, to wrap it up today, one of the things I believe, and I'm sure you've experienced this, great engineering, great coaching, and maybe the future of using these AI tools has in common that questions lead, the answers follow. And if we want better answers in life and in career, we need to ask better questions. So for the engineering leader who's out there, maybe they're fearful of the future of AI, maybe they want to be a CTO and get into entrepreneurship or do the things that you're doing, what would be the question that you would lead them with coming out of our conversation today?
Out of our conversation, in general, I love the question why, because you can ask it iteratively, just like a child would, 5, 6, 7 times.
Yeah.
You usually get to a root cause of what you're looking for, right? There's this, I forgot, Simon is his first name. I forgot his last name, but we can find out and put it in the notes. He has this great TED talk about start with why, and then you
Yeah.
form your
Simon
business.
Sinek.
Simon
Simon
Sinek. That's
Sinek.
right. That's
Yes.
right. I didn't want to butcher the last name.
No problem.
But let's make sure that the question has the word why in it. As why do I love what I do?
Ooh.
Let's leave it at that, because that opens the gate to all of the subsequent answers, like as to what you're going to ever do in the future.
Why do I love what I do? And then you can ask why 5 more times.
Yeah. And
I
what
love
if
it.
the answer is I don't love what I do? Well, that's an answer. Then do something else, because you guys will understand that it's a really short gig. It's really short, right? Like, we don't have any future longevity that gets us beyond, what human mortality is. So just spend the time doing what you love.
Amazing. Leon, thank you so much for your generosity today. Just want to acknowledge you for the incredible work your team's doing and for sharing your wisdom with the happy engineers out there. And we're going to have to come back for round two eventually. There's a lot of topics we didn't get to pull the thread far enough today. So thanks again, man.
Thanks, Zach. Great questions. Really appreciate the conversation.